And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our speakers. Tēnā koutou.
Tēnā koe, Corbin. Tēnā koutou katoa, ka mihi mahana, kia koutou. A very warm southern greeting from Te Waiponamu to everybody. It's lovely to be invited and great to take part, if slightly daunting being the very first speaker. So as Corbin said, I'm Bronwyn Hayward, and it's my pleasure to kick off for a couple of minutes about talking about how we're going in Aotearoa New Zealand and how on the SDGs, and how the world is going is really the bigger conversation that we can't be easily separated from. So back in 2015, when the world signed up to these, which must surely be one of the most successful little infographics around, when we signed the 17 development goals, it was a very different world from what the world we're in now 6 years later. At the time, it was quite a triumphant context, almost euphoric, very strong sense of multilateralism. We also signed, after careful negotiation, the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sendai disaster agreement had followed quickly. It seemed like we were entering a really significant multilateral period, and then many things changed politically and also in the last 18 months with the pandemic. The world has changed so significantly that obviously the effects on some of these measures, like the good health, the education access, gender equity, have been dramatically affected by COVID. The World Bank estimated last year that an additional 71 million people have been pushed back into extreme poverty. We've wiped out all sorts of gains in unexpected areas, like 20 years worth of gains in reducing child unpaid labour and child labour generally. So what happens next in our recovery from COVID globally and here in New Zealand really matters. How we spend our money and the kinds of infrastructure we build, how we think about supporting communities and businesses in recovery, their urban rebuilds, our water and sanitation policies, will all affect our climate, our health, and inequality or promoting equality. And that matters really very much here in Aotearoa New Zealand as well. In my personal opinion, New Zealand has really struggled with the Sustainable Development Goals since we signed the agenda. As Helen Clark pointed out back in 2018, there was New Zealand found nowhere for them to land in legislation or in government. And I noticed that in the first and the second of these global summits, many speakers complained and expressed concern that there was no coordinating minister who has overall responsibility for reporting on our progress, and that remains the situation. We've had a Minister of Statistics, a Minister of Finance, and a Minister of Internal Affairs who by default have had some reporting functions. In 2019, the New Zealand Prime Minister spoke to the UN on our voluntary national report, but we sit uncomfortably with these goals. Some of the challenges are partly endemic to the Sustainable Development Goals themselves. For instance, when the Treaty of Waitangi is our constitutional founding document, it is surprising that the Sustainable Development Goals are largely silent on issues for Indigenous people. Of the 17 goals and the 169 what am I looking for? The word is criteria for assessing achievement. Only 3 relate explicitly to Indigenous people. Goal 2.3 on hunger and food production, Goal 4.5 on access to education, and Goal 5 on security of land for gender equality. So I think a really important conversation comes later tonight, as Corbin said, to think about how can Partnership Goal 17 be made real, and what does that look like in our constitutional context here in Aotearoa. New Zealand's actions have not been explicitly aligned with many of the indicators, and the indicators themselves are often quite problematic. When you look at them in detail, there's still some. We've been working on a project here in Christchurch where we noted that there are no real indicators for measuring sustainable transport beyond kind of the initial sort of suggestion. There's very few that relate to youth. But even the ones that are there, it's a shame, I think, and a missed opportunity that we haven't explicitly lined our policy agenda with some of these stated initiatives and indicators. Yes, we have the Treasury Living Standards and the Wellbeing Budget, which you'll hear more about tonight. Yes, we have the new Statistics New Zealand Ngā Tū Tohu Indicators Project. Yes, we have a significant shift in New Zealand aid, around 30% increase between 2018 to 2022 in spending, particularly in the Pacific, and that will be extended with our pandemic virus rollout. Yes, we have some incredibly exciting local government initiatives, but largely taken by local government. You'll hear some themselves, some later today. And we've got some innovative new changes. Our Climate Commission, the infrastructure revision of the Three Waters, and in civil society, the government is still listing, I note, these summits themselves, Hui as a community summit, and some of the student activities. But what the global sustainable development goals are telling us is that we really need to be thinking about our progress globally and locally. They apply very much internally to New Zealand, just as they do internationally. And if we are serious about being thoughtful about our COVID recovery, then what comes next, as I pass over now to my wonderful panelists I'm looking forward to hearing from, in terms of how we measure our achievements, really matters. And I hope, if nothing else, the next voluntary national report that the government doesn't simply cluster together existing projects, but does start to try and report some of these against indicators. So I'll happily pass this back now to Corbin. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Bronwyn. Tēnā hoatu o tātou nei ringa. Kia Bronwyn. Thank you, Bronwyn. And now